starting with a theory that we can look for through this practice today. The body learns from diverse experiences with an intention over time. And that's a difference than how we are used to learning in many contexts, especially with the body, where we go, oh, actually, all you need to do is move this. And then the answer will come. You just need to move that out of the way, or tilt that thing, or lift that thing. And we kind of go right into the body and tell it what to do, which is maybe a way that we can start to experience different wiring or have different sensations. But the mental extrapolation of going from mind into body isn't necessarily how the body learns. The mind can pick up a concept. The mind learns with logic, learns with reason, and can put the pieces together pretty easily. The body learns with diverse and dynamic experiences that are held together with an intention over time. Where the mind picks things up very quickly, the body's slower. And there's a good reason for the body to be slower, and it's actually to our advantage that the body learns in a slower way. And we can unpack that more. So the intention that I'd like to set for us all today, so we can hold the space together, is freedom in the throat. So take a moment and close your eyes. And breathe through your nose, if that's comfortable for you. And sense the temperature of the air. And it's the temperature of the air that will help you get a sense of the openness of your breathing tube right now. So follow the temperature of the air through your nose, past your nose, to the back of your head, as it turns the corner and moves down the throat. And use the temperature to get a sense of, what's my throat like today? What's it like right now? How open, how free? What's its state of being? At rest. Pay a little attention to the differences between the right side and the left side of your vocal tract. It might not be completely symmetrical. And that's okay. And then when you've seen what there is to see in this moment, let it fade away. And blink your eyes open when you're ready. Already some good parasympathetic nervous system responses. Very nice. Very nice. Even that will have an effect. If you ask your student to sing, then have them close their eyes and breathe through their nose and feel their vocal tract and then sing again, their singing will change. Even that is a little micro to the macro of teaching the body, so that the body knows how to do the thing that we call singing. So I've used this reference a lot, and I'm going to use it again because I think we can mine a lot out of it. But take your hands together and create a force. And feel how as you push into your hands, that force travels through your arms and probably gets locked up somewhere. For me, it gets locked up in my pecs and under my armpits and in my lats. That's where I feel this motion stop as I push into my hands and then release, and then push into my hands and then release. I feel that energy travel from where I'm creating a force in my hands through my arms, because fascia is our force transmission system, communicating from force into muscle, through fascia into muscle, through fascia into muscle, etc. So we create a force with our hands that travels through our muscles, doesn't stop at a bone, which is our previous understanding that muscles go from bone to bone. And now change the quality of the force and press softer. And calibrate the force so that you can press and feel the flow go past where it previously locked up, whether it's where it locked for me or wherever it locked for you. How softly do you need to push for it not to get stuck where it got stuck a minute ago? And does this inspire you to hold your breath? If you're holding your breath, do less. And just watch how your body manages the force that you put into it. How it either gets stuck somewhere or how you can work with it so that you can follow its flowing further. So it can go through you more. So that force can be transmitted more fully. Because when it gets blocked, it creates heat, which creates inflammation and pain. And from a fascial perspective, it creates adherence, stickiness, dehydration. And that's where we experience stuckness. The flow doesn't continue in a very real way. You can let that fade away. So to unpack just a little bit of that, and if we have questions, don't feel like I'm on this long hour-long monologue. Like, interact. Please feel free to use the chat. How was it seeing the whiteboard, by the way? Can you see it now? Great. Maybe it was just a weird day. So we're using a strategy right now to help the energy flow that's called the Weber-Fechner law. And Weber-Fechner law is all about how we can perceive stimulus based on lower stimulus. Oh, here comes Lillian. So essentially, to make the Weber-Fechner law really simple, the less we do, the more we feel. And we experience that outside of ourselves quite frequently in how quiet does it have to be to hear the ticking of the clock? Or how dark does the room have to be for one candle to light it significantly? If the room is very bright, one candle, I won't even notice it. So if there's a lot of work in my body, if I'm pushing hard, I won't notice it. If I'm pushing soft, I start to pay attention. And I can hear it go further. And I can feel it transmit further. So the Weber-Fechner law is an amazing strategy that we talk a lot about in Feldenkrais a lot. I'm midway through that training, so this is very much reflective of the experiential learning that we have in Feldenkrais, that model. Absolutely, brilliant. And you're actually bringing in the thought of how that excess noise pulls versus pushes. It pulls away from what you're trying to move towards. So even that has a metaphorical push and a pull, as does the relationship you have with the people you're working. Weber-Fechner law can apply to the relationship, can apply to the moment. It doesn't have to just apply to the stimulus and the awareness you have with yourself, but it can also affect the way that you relate and push and pull with the person in the room with you. So it's sort of fascinating micro to macro, which there always is. That's beautiful. Let's build on to this idea. Take one hand and push it into the other. So you're only making a force, you're doing it lopsided. So one hand is like a wall saying, no, you're not going to push into me. And the other hand is saying, yes, I am. Yes, I am. And how does your body manage that force? And does it lock up in a different way? And can you use the Weber-Fechner law to, even with this force pushing against a wall that is your other hand, can it transmit further? Can it transmit fully? And you might feel your breath holds. And if you're holding your breath, do a little less, imagine a little more. But you might feel around this wall-like hand that there's some thickening happening. There's some compressing happening. And that's a really important feeling to recognize of muscles flexing, combating the force. And part of what I want to unpack today is an update to stretching science and muscle behavior. Only do one side. And the reality is that muscles don't actually shorten, they thicken. They thicken. And we can prove it right now. Make a muscle with your bicep and hold your arm and feel your whole upper arm flex. This is not a bicep maneuver. Your whole arm is engaged. Go hold your thigh with two hands and go to take a step. Put weight on the ground as if you're going to stand up and feel your whole thigh thicken. This is an experiential from John Sharkey, clinical anatomist. So our idea of a muscle having a function, a muscle has a job to do, isn't real. It's a reduction that's useful in some contexts, but like a reduction, any reduction is a model of something, and the model isn't the thing, so it can only get so close to actually behaving like the thing. So it's just a model to say that muscles shorten, but really they're thickening, and we feel it. And it's because muscles live in an environment of fascia. We felt the muscle flow, the energy flowing past our bones, through our system, force transmission. And we've seen in past fascia talks that the deep fascia is like fibrous and striated, like there's striping in it. But it's not just one direction, there's this cross striping in it. I know this is maybe a little hard to see, but you can imagine it. And so sometimes there's a 90-degree cross section in the weave, and sometimes there's a 60-degree cross section in the weave, creating triangles, which is very fascinating. And I'm talking about the fascia. Our muscles live in fascia. They grow in fascia. Our bones grow in fascia. So this is super important because in one direction of this weave, we have collagen. One direction, we have collagen. And the collagen is pleated. Sometimes you'll hear collagen crimp. Like remember the 80s when we crimped our hair? So it's folded, it's pleated, and it's in one direction. And wrapping in the other direction is elastin, which is coiled. So imagine that. We've got pleats that can unfold and fold up. And then on the other axis, which there isn't, but we could think of it as a model like an axis, there's elastic behavior. So as you're making a muscle, we've got this thickening. It's a whole different behavior. It's a whole different image. And elastic, what elasticity means is resistance to deformation. So the elasticity, the elastin, doesn't just allow this, because collagen does that, right? Like collagen has that sort of gooey viscosity where it can form and reform. But an elastic band, what makes it highly elastic is that it comes back. Not that it goes out, that it comes back. And if you look up on Google, what does elastic mean? It'll say resistance to deformation. So it's that it comes back. That's really important. It returns. Our wheels are turning. What are some thoughts right now? Cool. Okay, cool. Yes, Lisa. I see you want to say something. Okay. Cool. Let's come back to this push. Same hand. Push into that hand like it's a wall. Maybe it's a little bit easier to feel the flow go a little bit further. Maybe where it was getting stuck before, it's not getting stuck as much or at all, or maybe it's just a little bit different, or maybe you just appreciate a little bit more about it. Because that's another thing about the body. You give it the intention, then give it a little time off, then it'll do it better the next time. Now, instead of pushing into that hand, on the same hand, give it a little tug. And I'm showing you my arm, but it would be best if it was resting on something, so I'm not using my muscles to hold it up. So give your hand a little tug and feel how that little tug can go through your wrist into your forearm. And you can feel that elastic nature of the tissue as you pull on the hand a little bit and feel a little separation through the bones of the wrist. And then it comes back. It doesn't stay that way. It comes back. And if you pull maybe a little bit less hard, applying the Weber-Fechner principle, maybe you can feel it move through the upper arm and look for it to move past the upper arm and feel where it goes into the body, how the body manages that force. And because our intention today is freedom in the throat, you could even take a look in the throat as pulling on the hand and feeling the flow becomes easier, requires less monitoring. See if there's some sort of awareness that you're actually communicating with the side of that neck, maybe into the throat to a subtle degree, maybe into the ribs, maybe into the pelvic floor. And focusing our attention in different places is like shining a spotlight and also giving an invitation. You can participate here, which it might have already been doing, but just under your awareness. And if you let that go and just close your eyes again and breathe through your nose and look into your vocal tract again, it might be really different, the right side and the left side. We've been only focusing on one side. How does that side feel different than the other side? And let your mind's eye expand as you get a sense of your throat. And look through your torso. Notice how your ribs might be moving with a different quality or a different amount or just a different appreciation. And maybe the pelvic floor feels different on the right and left too. And maybe it doesn't. And if it doesn't, that's okay. We're all working with our patterns. And these are all deep wells that we can get deeper and deeper into as we open up our brain to seeing more inside ourselves, dialoguing more specifically with ourselves, and beginning to understand and work with the nature of the fabric that we have. Do you feel asymmetrical? Yeah, cool. Cool. So you have a before and an after shot right now, because one side hasn't gotten any attention. So what's that side feel like? The side that hasn't received any love. You know, if we put our attention onto the pushing hand instead of the resisting hand, we'd have had a very different experience doing the very same thing. And the side that we're pushing into, the wall hands, that side, I wonder how that would have felt if we weren't actually paying attention to it, but more thinking about, see, this is where we enrich each other. You're opening my mind, Maggie, because we're really talking about tension and compression and how I'm tensioning something and compressing something else. And we talked about tension again last week, and we're going to talk about it again today because it's such a big deal and it can't be the enemy because it's a reality in our body. I love to use my Woody as an example of how important tension is to our structural integrity and our ability to function, because this push puppet is a bunch of plastic pieces that are only held together by a string that's tense on the inside, and it has a button on the bottom, and when I push the button on the bottom, the string becomes looser. Wah, wah. Right? This needs tension to stand, just like we do. We need tension to stand. We need tension to do anything we're doing. Now, we use tension in a different way in a pedagogical context. I think we use the word tension to mean a lack of energy flow, or energy is getting stuck somewhere, or something doesn't want to move because energy is stuck there. So I think we use the idea of tension as a bad thing that really reflects fascial adherence or some sort of lack of flow or inhibition in movement that we could continue to reduce down and find that it's not a function of tension. It's maybe the tension and compression balance is askew. But let's unpack that in a sec. So let me share screen, because let's take a look at some muscles, because we're talking about how muscles flex and how they stretch. So let's get an image of when we're looking at a skeletal muscle. We're thinking about this. That within this bag that contains all the muscle fibers, there are other bags, series of other bags like this that they're pulling out. And inside of those other bags, there are smaller bags. And inside of those smaller bags, there are smaller bags and smaller bags. So we have this self-similar fractal arrangement from our big skeletal muscles down each layer, or not layer, but scale level, different scales of muscles. And fractal geometry is about, like, if you looked at it under a microscope and you kept going finer and finer in, it would look very similar. It wouldn't look very different. And the finer in you go, the thing that's above it doesn't exist anymore. So it's fascinating to listen to some of the researchers talk about how when you look at, fascia under a microscope, the fascia's gone. You see something else. And then as you look deeper in, the thing you were looking at is now gone. And so it's fascinating to think about that in this fractalized way. But when it comes to fascia, this white here, which is called tendon, is densified fascia. Tendon and ligament is densified fascia, as is cartilage plus an ingredient, as is bone plus a different ingredient. So cartilage and bone are actually on a fascial continuum from harder to softer matter. And around every bag is fascia. And one of the functions of fascia is to create a lubricant so that there can be movement that doesn't create heat or friction, so it doesn't become pain. So imagine every single one of these bags moves. And so when we're pulling on our hands and feeling spaciousness between our bones, what we're really doing is pulling the slack out of the fabric. We're unpleating and uncoiling the collagen and the elastin. And even that's a reduction, right? There's more to it than that. But as a model, what we're doing as we pull on a finger to crack a knuckle, we're taking slack out of the fabric. Let me share one more thing, and I know that there are some thoughts. So one more thing I want to share is what the collagen looks like. On a molecular, microscopic level, springs, helical, woven springs. Look at that. Like, what kind of image of movement does that conjure? That we have this spring right within us, around and through all of our muscles. We have springs. And they've actually done experiments with kangaroos. How can they jump so high? Because their thighs, their quads aren't actually very strong. And what they found is that the tensioning of the tendon, the Achilles tendon, is what gives them the capacity to jump. Because tension is stored energy. What are our thoughts? Where are we? That's a great question. So I think important for us to imagine is that what we just saw in the picture that I showed is made by an artist. So it doesn't really look like that in a body. That white doesn't end there. In fact, the white, even in all the books, it'll taper off, but it doesn't really taper off. It continues through. So the more densified fascia that we call tendon continues through the muscle into the next tendon if there's a tendon on the other end. So it's the stronger compartment that attaches towards bone or towards another muscle, depending on what's happening at the other end. And so there's still differential movement in that fascia. And depending on what you're doing, it can move in different directions. So there is an omnidirectional, and this ties into what Lisa was talking about with oblique. There's an omnidirectional expansion and contraction in the fascial tissues called auxeticity. That when you pull it this way, it doesn't shrink this way. You pull it this way, it gets bigger this way, like the Hoberman sphere that I love to play with, that is maybe in another room now. And so if the weave is this way, then you're going to get a certain kind of movement potential. And if the weave is this way, you're going to get a different kind of movement potential. And it's interesting when you think about the IT band, for the weave in the IT band, it really doesn't stretch in many directions or very far, because of the way it's woven. And so people are trying to torture their IT band to stretch in a direction that it doesn't stretch in. It doesn't go that way. And so there's very limited movement potential when you apply a force. It locks it up. And they've done experiments that I've seen in the cadaver lab where they've attached weights to the IT band fascia. And in one direction, it took like 75 pounds of weight to move it at all, to get it to look like it was stretching at all. And then it started to shear and break. Interesting. You know, fascia has a long elastic range. So that means a long range where we can get the idea of stretching, length in our body, and then it comes back because it's elastic. Over time, it will reform, because when you tension the fabric, this is so fascinating. It sends the cells that are in the fascia, which it's not cell rich, so it doesn't talk to the brain very much. But when you tension the fabric, the fibroblasts, which are the cells in the fascia, are inspired, or they generate more collagen. So the more we go like this, the more we're building more collagen. So we can actually get stretchier. We can actually develop more length in our fabric so that we can have a bigger range of motion. It just takes a longer time scale than just doing this. We got to do it all the time. We got to do it every day. As opposed to compression, which sends signals for hyaluronic acid, which is the lubricant. So maybe this talks to Lisa's question, that your massage therapist was applying some compression to release and create more hyaluronic acid, so there was more movement. All works together. All these things ebb and flow together. The auxeticity and the Weber-Fechner principle with oblique, it all is so multifactorial. How we don't know, we can only learn so much from the technology that we have. If you're not familiar with Jean-Claude Gimbarteau's work, I'll put that name in the chat. Jean-Claude Gimbarteau. He is a plastic surgeon and mostly specializing in hands. And he's also interested in, fascia research, and has created the only footage that we have of fascia in a living body through surgeries. And so he's created some documentaries, including Strolling Under the Skin, which you can see on YouTube. And his website, I've written him because it's very inexpensive to have a year membership. It's like $100, but EndoVivo, I think it's .com, but it's in 2 languages, and in English, it doesn't lead you to being able to pay for it yet. It doesn't lead you to the page. So I've written him, but endovivo.com, there's more footage from living tissue, but we are limited in that capacity. So we're learning from what we know and the limitations. So what we're really talking about here is a concept called biotensegrity. And biotensegrity is an emergent model that explains the body in a different light. Instead of biomechanics, which is a bajillion years old and has a lot of needs a lot of adjusting for what we know now, since the model of biomechanics, 1500, 1600, 1700s, based on math that was created by Euclid from 300 BCE. We need a little bit of an update. And so this new model, this different way of looking at the body through biotensegrity, is looking to the laws of nature instead of the laws we created based on man-made machines of the 1600s to explain ourselves. So when we have fascia research, and we know there's no leverage in the body. There is no lever in the body. A lever by definition is open on both ends. There's nothing open in the body. There's no lever in the body. But we have leverage like movements, right? We have very simple looking movements for the chaos, the quantum movements under the skin. And so Stephen Levin is the father of biotensegrity, and he is a osteopathic surgeon, and he was in the Museum of Natural History, I think, in DC, and he was looking at dinosaurs, those big dinosaurs, and he had a think, and he said, "That's so interesting. You always see dinosaur tracks, but you never see tail tracks. How did they keep up those big tails? Using the laws that we have of, like, we're a compression column, how would they keep the tail up? Why wouldn't it drag on the ground?" And they started to think about other forms and goes, well, that's really weird that our pelvis and our head, our heavy bones, aren't on the ground, but we have really small bones on the ground, our foot bones. That doesn't make sense. How do we not crush our foot bones? And looking at other animals, the heavy parts are on top. This doesn't make sense. There's something illogical. And he went outside, and outside of that history, of that museum, there was, and it's no longer there, unfortunately, the Kenneth Snelson's Needle Tower. And I'm going to show you a picture, some pictures of that, because he was so inspired by this sculpture of tensegrity. Tensegrity, which is all about continuous tension and discontinuous compression. These rods, these firm rods, are being compressed into place by the cables that are running through them in a certain mathematical arrangement that this needle tower can go 60 feet up into the air and withstand forces, be gravity independent. It holds itself in its own shape by the tension that's holding together its form. And create shapes inside. The emergent properties that come out of this is fascinating. And there are other tensegrity sculptures, and people make art out of it. It's really actually a concept from art and architecture. Like geodesic dome homes are built in a integral way. But there are lots of examples of tensegrity, this push and pull, that help things keep its shape. And I made one. I made a tensegrity for you all last night. This is what I sort of, my sneak peek. I made it out of chopsticks and elastic bands and string, yarn. And all of these sets of chopsticks aren't touching. This holds its shape. It's gravity independent. And it's pretty flexible. Watch it break. It's pretty flexible. But what's very interesting about this is how, if I move any of it, it all moves. If I move one part, it all moves. I'm going to move this. Because it's got this continuous tension that holds it in its shape. So that means it's communicating with itself. This inert stuff has a communication network. I move one part of it, and it all moves. And this is analogous to our form. We could say that these struts, these chopsticks, are like our bones, because our bones don't touch. We're not only not a compression column, we're not a compression column for a lot of reasons. One, it doesn't go straight down. It's a series of curves. That doesn't make sense. But also, the bones aren't actually resting on each other. They are spaced apart from each other, held apart by tissue in tension, tensioned tissue, held apart by tension. And everybody hangs up call. That's it. But and that's often how people use these tensegrities to explain human movement and biotensegrity, bio alive tensegrity, is that bones and tissue like muscle and fascia. But what the researchers talk about, what the people who are really knee deep in biotensegrity talk about, is that it explains the invisible forces. Because on every scale level, because we're made in a fractal geometrical arrangement, at every scale level, we see this kind of force of push and pull. The struts that are pushing away from the tension and the tension that's pulling in the struts creates this dynamic arrangement of push and pull that gives integrity to form. And there are a series of diamonds in this. There's lots I could show you in this. There's a series of diamonds and there's a series of triangles. Triangles are most stable shape, like right there. And if you push up from one triangle to another triangle, you can't see it, but it's helical. It's turning in on itself. Just like our helical collagen and all the spirals in our form are all spiralized. So there's a lot that we can learn from this. Now you can buy a squish toy that is tensegrity, but there's a difference here that's important. There's an important difference here, is that these are made out of elasticated strings. Well, that's just yarn, so it's tension. While if I move these two apart from each other, it doesn't respond the same way. It doesn't communicate in the same way because it's too elastic. It's not tense enough. Look how much movement there is versus proportionate movement. This is proportionate movement, actually, where this is disproportionate. So thoughts, feelings, confusions. It's a big think. It's a big think. So don't feel like, oh my God, I don't get that at all right now and I'm a failure. No, just like take it in, let it wash over you and look for it. Lisa. We run ourselves based on the mental model that we have and that's handed or forced into us. And so if we have this mental model of, oh, don't move that, we won't move that. Or if we have the mental model of, I need to stretch and stretching means pain. I don't know why I got that hamstring tear. I was just stretching. Well, you were stretching with old stretching science information. And so it didn't work for you because it doesn't overlay the reality of the form. The reality of the form is that we're woven and that we have a big elastic range, but we take a long time to get there. And then if we push it, we go into the plastic range and then we tear. So it's like bringing in new knowledge that we know now and assimilating that into our mental model can be a really big difference between living with pain and inflammation like rheumatoid arthritis and moving through it. Yes. And this is brilliant. This is what I lost track of, is that where are our muscles? They're in fascia. They're in an environment of fascia. And I've been thinking a lot about the environment that we're in and how the environment affects us. I can live in a basement apartment and have no sunlight come in and have mildew and black mold. And I will not thrive. I will survive, but I will not thrive. Or I could live in a geodesic dome home that's all windows and have sunlight coming in at me as often as the sun is up in the sky and have that place feel so clean with UV rays and everything else, everything that I love in there, very brightly colored, and just live my best life. How do we give that to our muscles? Our muscles are in an environment of fascia. And our muscles really the thing even, are we really talking to the muscles, or is that just what we're used to thinking about? Is that just the mental model we're carrying? Is that the muscles are doing the work? Because it's a myofascial system. You can't say it's the muscles or the fascia, really. It's a system. And that system's nested in a bigger system, which is nested in a bigger system, which is nested in a bigger system. And so we just keep zooming in and going, all right, what are we looking at here? And how does that affect things as I zoom out? And it's this constant zooming in and zooming out that I think builds our comprehensive understanding, building the relationships between these concepts. So in an interesting way, every topic is like a point on a chopstick, pushing and pulling on each other. And you and I are like points on chopsticks, pushing and pulling on each other, regulating our tension, getting on the same page together so that we can be equally tensioned and compressed and balanced with each other, so we can grow together and learn together. And it's the fascinating micro and macro stuff that we feel can verify in our experience of ourselves that we're made by the laws of nature, not by man-made machines. I connect to my experience of expansion and contraction on every scale level, down to nano, but even a bubble. A bubble has that push and pull in it, like a cell has a push and a pull in it. And if everything in me is pushing and pulling on each other, then everything is in motion. And if it's not, it's getting stuck. It's getting sticky. It's getting hot. So I want to share with you in the last moment the plan that I have moving forward in the fall. And some of you are already aware of this. For those of you who aren't, I want you to be aware, and you have time to think. But we're going to continue Fascia Talks as a low-cost membership moving in the fall. It's going to get kickstarted after September 18th, because I'm going to do my Talking to Your Tension workshop again, which is all about fascia and using gummy worms as an analogy to our form. And so we might gather more community members from that, but that will kick off our conversation. And then we'll meet once a week for about 60 to 90 minutes and continue to unpack and get knee deep into this material, continue to get on the same page with each other and enrich each other. I have about 8 or 9 yeses right now, which is amazing. This community is coming together. This is going to happen. So I'm very excited to see it happen. I want to expand it so that it doesn't feel one-sided, but that we could have a get-together like today where we unpack something like biotensegrity and then sit with it for a week, and then come back after 7 days and stay with it and answer all the questions and deal with all the things that came up through the week, and then start to move it into pedagogy. How do we use this as pedagogy? And we created a few different ways today. This will be effective. If you look in your throat now, it will be different than it was an hour ago. So after we sit with it, get clear about it, turn into practical pedagogy, learn how to integrate it, work with students. How do we make it simple so it's not so chatty with students, but practical and experiential for them, bypassing the information, getting right to experience, teach that body. Then we'll move on. And we'll sit with each concept for maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, depending on how it flows together, and make the connections in the other concepts so that we are building our network, our neural network of understanding, just like a tensegrity.